As I am inviting Holly Smith to come online and start sharing her screen, I just want to mention a response to a question I received. So, our project is primarily focused on BIPOC communities, other marginalized communities. But, we can't be everything to everyone, right? So that is why we are coming to the collective, and we are asking for your wisdom and your resources. But what at the foundation, we are presenting core concepts that can then be applied to your community, to your specific interests. So we invite you to, engage with the resources at that level and look at them as strengths, and not look at anything as a deficit. Okay. So with that said, um, Holly Smith is a dear, dear friend, has been working with us on this project since the very beginning. I pushed some of her work earlier in the chat, and so we could not do this convening without having Holly join us. So Holly's biography is on the project website. I will push that through again. But without further ado, welcome Holly Smith.
Dr. Cook, thank you so much for that overly generous introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Thank you. My heart is full this morning. I just want to extend my profound gratitude to my sisters of the Stacks, Dr. Aisha Johnson, Dr. Nicole Cook, my wonderful colleagues who are co-presenting. Aisha, that was a fantastic overview. I need those slides too to catch up. And it's so wonderful to see so many dear friends and colleagues in the chat. I won't start calling names because we will be here all day, but I'm just really honored and thrilled to be here and to be involved, to help support in any way I can the critical work that um, we're doing around radical empathy in archival education, but the critical work that you all are doing. So I want to make sure and leave enough room for conversation and questions. So following up on Dr. Johnson's fantastic overview, what I'll speak about today, I'll frame the conversation around radical empathy in the archives, but I also want to take that conversation a little deeper with some of my experiences here at Spelman and really amplify what I see as Black feminist archival practice, particularly, and how that can help inform really LIS archives education and memory work and why we do what we do. If we specifically kind of ground our work in not just radical empathy, but as well going into Black feminist archival practice. So I'm looking forward to this being more of a conversation today than a soliloquy. And so since I'll be talking, I don't know if I bring up the chat, will it block what you all are seeing on the screen sharing? So if I miss anything or Dr. Johnson or Dr.
It won't.
Nicole, oh, Dr. Johnson, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I can. We'll monitor it for you, but it won't. You'll be able to pull it to the side. It won't disrupt what they see.
Okay, perfect. Because I actually never knew that. So thank you.
No
Thank you,
worries.
Dr. Johnson. I will appreciate you both. So I will pull it to the side here. Okay. So the first thing I like to do before I do any type of presentation is really to ground ourselves in the words of Black feminists. That's the practice I have, and I think that is so apropos to this work if we're talking about radical shifts in curriculum and these radical ideologies. So if you're familiar with Toni Cade Bambara, iconic cultural worker, feminist filmmaker, and if you've read her work from The Salt Eaters, iconic novel. This is one of the, I think, most famous quotes. And it's from a question from a woman named Minnie Ransom, who's a fabled community healer, to a woman named Velma, who suffered emotional and mental breakdown. So Minnie asked Velma this question. Are you sure, sweetheart, you want to be well? Just so you're sure, sweetheart, and ready to be healed. Because wholeness is no trifling matter, a lot of weight when you're well. And it just makes me think about the responsibility that we have for individual and communal healing in this work. It's a lot of responsibility, but we bear the weight together to get healed and to get whole. And I see healing, personal and community healing and wholeness I don't see a disconnect between that and working in academia or doing this particular work so we can all get liberated and free. So I just always like to ground myself in that ideology. And again, in the words of Sister Audre Lorde from that iconic poem that might be familiar with, A Litany for Survival, but when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive. And in this situation of just the political upheaval we see the world over, it when we again do this collectively, even if there's fear, there's worry, there's trepidation and anger, we can still speak. And I think it's important to keep those things in mind when we're, again, doing this type of work. And Isabel, I agree. Tony Cade is just a sage. So thank you all for letting me just speak the words and bring Black feminists into this room. But I want to also go over some of the questions that I want to tackle today in this conversation, and that I hope that we can really bring into the conversation throughout the day. We had the wonderful introduction and the incredible overview, and I know Steve will continue the conversation with our fantastic colleagues tomorrow. So these are just a few of the questions particularly that I want us to interrogate today. What is radical empathy in the archives and its relationship to Black feminist archival practice? What does it look like to tell these whole encompassing stories of community, particularly those of our communities who have been historically marginalized? And how, I think this is one of the important thing, again, that Dr. Johnson was alluding to earlier, how do we as memory workers tell these stories and create collaborative but not co-optive relationships with communities? Because as you, some of you might be familiar with the phrase all skin folk and kinfolk. So that doesn't mean we can't perpetrate the same harm just because we might be people of color. How can serve as liberatory spaces for focused on equity and justice for historically marginalized communities? But how do we take care of ourselves and each other, personally and professionally? So those are some of the questions that I hope to answer today and that we can discuss. So again, these are the objectives: to really provide an overview of radical empathy in the archival practice, as well as feminist archival practice, just to ground us all in the background, to discuss how we can enact principles of radical empathy. And I'll particularly be using the Spelman Archives an example, so to provide some actionable examples and steps. And then I would invite us at the end to consider what are methods of self and communal care. And that's where I really be interested to hear from some of our colleagues and audience members as well. So the first thing I want to do actually is a bit of an activity, if we can, and I'm monitoring the time. And I would just like us to reflect maybe for a minute or two on what is something meaningful to you personally and why. It could be an object, it could be a memory, a physical thing, a tangible thing, but I just like us to reflect on that for a moment. And if people want to share in the comments, please feel free. There's no pressure to share, but I just want us to be grounded and think about that, something that is very meaningful. So I'll just give it a minute so we can reflect. Okay, my family, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. About my chosen family, absolutely. As my sister says, there's relatives and then there's family. So I, fully believe in those knitted by love and meaning, family and friends, career, absolutely, growth, purposeful work. I love that, my grandmother's recipes collection, stories of ancestors, untold stories of ancestors. Absolutely. This is beautiful. Thank you all for sharing. Women's health in relation to myself and research, laughter, my grandmother quilts and arts. Hey, Gabby, audiobooks, oral histories. So I told you, when I see names of friends, I'm getting excited here. No, thank you all so much for your willingness to be vulnerable and sharing. And so I really appreciate that. So as we continue, please feel free to continue to include them in the chat or drop them in the chat, or we can discuss. But so to share and participate in this exercise, I want to mention someone who is meaningful to me and grounds all this work, my precious mother, who transitioned 2 years ago to be an ancestor. And that's something that's hard to say because it's never enough time. And though we know we lose people, it is very difficult to lose someone that you love dearly. And with that being said, it brings me a lot of joy to speak about my mother. Some of you all, know Tamika, yeah, the love mom. She would expend if she was here, she would be pouring love and care over each of you. And so just knowing that the relationship I have with her, like you said, with the ancestors, that's meaningful, that is meaningful to me. And I use that memory and that love to be able to propel me to honor her memory and to honor the memory of the ancestors. So I just bring that up to say, and really to ground us today in some of these questions as we continue to have the conversation. So, when you all were talking about that particular item or memory, why was that important to you? And what do you want us to know from that particular memory or item or anything that you chose? And I think this is very important to, again, humanize the work we do, to bring the closeness and understanding that will allow us to really, build empathy and relate to people. But I will get in this conversation. The radical part is when we can really have that connectivity and connection on a personal as well as professional level, and to understand what is meaningful to us, what might be meaningful to someone else, and how we can relate to each other. And again, as we were grounded by Dr. Johnson and Dr. Cook, how does that allow us to be rooted in actionable change centered on equity and justice and care? So we'll go to the actual overview of radical empathy in the archives for our discussion. And so centering some of the work that we had, my sister co-editors, and I want to extend profound love to Elvia, Shannon, Jasmine, and so delighted to see Andrew on this call. So to center the work that we did for that special issue, we drew from the work from Michelle Caswell, Marika Saifor from Human Rights to Feminist Ethics, Radical Empathy in the Archives. So if you excuse me, I'm sorry. I do know how to work a PowerPoint. Sorry about that, everybody. But this article, if you can read here, proposes that theoretical model used by archivists to address social justice concern. So Caswell and Seinfeld were really trying to center the feminist feminist principle of ethics instead of rights-based individual models. So in this feminist ethics of care, they archivists, we are seen as caregivers bound to creators, subjects, users, communities through a web of mutual effective responsibility. And so then Caswell and Seifer go on to talk about the four interrelated shifts in these archival relationships based on the principles of radical empathy, focusing on feminist ethics of care. So these are the relationships that they highlight in their particular article. So number one, the relationships that we as memory workers have or archivists have between records creators, the relationship between the memory workers and archivists with the subjects of those records, the relationship between archivists and users of those records, and as well as the relationship between the archivist or memory worker with larger, broader communities, outreach, and advocacy um, there. Oh, we'll miss you, Gabby. We'll see you later. So, my colleagues and I were able to present and discuss the conversation around radical empathy at the 2017 uh, Society of American Archivists. And that's a picture of us all there, my sister comrades. And even the process of preparing for that particular type in presentation allowed us to consider another relationship, the relationship that we have to each other, honestly, as archivists. And how do we care for each other? How do we care for each other doing this work? How do we care for ourselves, again, doing work at difficult political moments, at challenging institutions through just the human nature, the personal uh, issues that we all face? So that actually led some of us to really want to continue, well, all of us, but those of us who had like the capacity and were looking to continue the conversation, to then have the idea of wanting to do an edited collection, inviting colleagues, memory workers, and community members to reflect on radical empathy in the archives and archival practice. So that led to a incredible, Andrew, how long was the process? I'm trying to remember. It led, so we started this conversation in 2017, but came out, and over the course of that, it was a few years. And I mean, we had the pandemic, state sanctioned violence. It was a very challenging time. So myself, Shannon O'Neill, Jasmine Jones, and Elvia Arroyo Ramirez were able to have the ultimate pleasure of working with, oh, and thank you, Andrew, for reminding me. It was okay, one of the largest issues, 18 pieces. That was quite a lot. But we were able to work together virtually over those years with Andrew and our fantastic contributors, such as Dr. Cook, Kathy Carmo, who we mentioned, and just to, it was really a fantastic exercise in our own practices of the care that we have for each other, but just to have such rich and diverse perspectives on what does it actually mean to enact these feminist ethics of care in archival practice in practical, actionable, and not just theoretical ways. So these were some of the issues that we really tackled. And again, this volume is free and available to the public. I think Dr. Johnson did a wonderful job of that overview of radical empathy in general, and including this on the bibliography. So I'm happy to also drop this in the chat too if it's helpful. But these were the issues that we really wanted to tackle and talked about in the editor's note. So number one, what are some of the evolving definitions of radical empathy broadly? Because there are other disciplines outside of library and information science and archives and memory work, as we've seen earlier, that discuss radical empathy. Two, what does contemporary care work look like? And how does radical empathy facilitate liberatory archival practice? Again, moving just beyond theory and conversation. So what does it look like to have actionable items and changing and shifting of thoughts and behavior in our institutions, in us personally, or wherever we, communities that we work with? So these were some of our, and I won't go through and just read through everything. I'm happy to share these slides later. But thank you, Andrew, so much for dropping that in the chat. And I think the most important thing here for us, my sister colleagues and the editor, is what radical empathy, how we were defining it, and what does it mean to practice it, and again, to move against systems of oppression, and specifically looking at amplifying what does a feminist ethics of care, excuse me, keep rolling doing that, to think beyond, again, just simple practice of empathy, like, oh, I can understand, I know how you feel, to fundamentally shifting our interactions, behaviors, and understandings, again, to move toward a more just, equitable, whether it's work environments, relationships, and archival and memory work practice. So again, just illuminating what some of the special issue articles talked about, and what this particular issue focuses on are just some of these, again, thinking of Dr. Cook and our colleagues' wonderful conversation around shifting priorities in LIS education, holding space for grief for those five effective communities that we mentioned before. So what does it look like to do this work to take care of ourselves, but understanding the grief that people bring, that hold, the grief that can exist in some of the collections and work and readings that we do? How do we understand and work that? And also hold each other and our institutions accountable to dismantle these systems of oppression. So I want to take the time to also amplify some of the incredible collectives that I happen to be a part of, and that some of you all might be a part of as well. Again, if you're familiar with the We Here community, the Black Memory Workers Collective, founded by our sister colleague Zakia Collier, and Project Stand, which focuses on working with current and former student activists, and to highlight those contributions of current and former student activists. So again, I'll drop these in the chat and put these on the bibliography for later. And I want to mention this too. A colleague, Brenda Gunn, shared this with me several weeks ago. And Aisha, when you mentioned that, some of the limitations around empathy, I thought this was very interesting. The dark side of empathy. And this particular author was using some really good kind of corporate examples to, like, you can use whatever methods to understand how someone feels, but that can also be used to be exploitative. And also, the idea is empathy is not the same as compassion. So you can look at somebody, oh, and maybe you feel bad, you can understand, and you feel happy. But the idea, you can feel what the affective empathy is different, to feel what other feels than to just understand what others feel. So I thought that was just a very interesting way, again, to reaffirm that the idea of empathy being radical empathy, even though he doesn't use the word radical here, I think to truly be radical, there has to be a shift or talk in behavior, right? So empathy that connects, builds, and heals requires a code of ethics and is a responsibility, not just a soft skill or just to say, I understand what you feel. And I know in this space we're using radical. I think, unfortunately, when we think about communities, radical has the connotation sometimes of being unhinged, but radical to me is revolutionary and transformative. And to really want something to be different, you have to, I think, care about it and want to shift it and change it. So this was just a really interesting article, I think, to have the considerations to see the flip side of when we're trying to talk about empathy, even radical empathy. Radical empathy really takes the idea of empathizing with someone and again puts it into actual action. So now I just want to give a brief overview of Spelman College, the archives, and we'll go briefly into some of the ways we enact radical empathy and archival practice, but specifically looking at Black feminist archival practice and how that has informed not only the creation of the archives here, but our everyday practice and praxis, outreach, advocacy, organization, arrangement, and amplification to do this justice work. So I'm assuming that most people might be familiar with Spelman College. If not, you will be now, and I'm elated to say I've been here 11 years now. That's the longest playtime I've been anywhere. But I have to say, what has been really refreshing in this particular political moment is to be in a space where I know, right, Dr. Cook, 11 years, almost 12. And it's just been really refreshing, I think, to be in a space where we can amplify Black women and Black people's stories, and we don't have to justify that. So Spelman's College Archives, we have a really unique situation in that we are not embedded in an academic library like most archives and institutions. So Spelman is a component of a large consortia, I believe the largest consortia in the states of historically Black colleges and universities, including Spelman, Morehouse, Clark Atlanta University, and the Morehouse School of Medicine. So there is one library that serves all the schools in the consortium. Hey, Gigi. I'm sorry, I'm doing a little visiting too. It's great to see you. Um, so the Spelman Archives, we're actually a component of the Women's Resource and Research Center, founded on Spelman's campus in 1981 by iconic Black feminist Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall, which also houses the Comparative Women's Studies program. And I want to say the first women's studies program at an HBCU. So it's a really unique situation to be a component of a women's center, an active comparative women's studies program, and really just the active progressive space on campus. So we are the institutional repository for Spelman, but because we're connected to the Women's Center, we also have a mission to document Black women and Black people of the African diaspora as well. So again, just a little bit of background about the Women's Center. Again, founded by, and there's Dr. Guy Sheftall reading from Toni Cade Bambara at one of our events. But it really is a radical progressive hotbed of activity on campus. And a lot of the active student organizations such as Afrikiti, the LGBTQIA student organization, Feminist Majority Leadership, Students for Justice in Palestine, a number of student organizations are attached. And there's a lot of community outreach programming. So again, when the archives being attached to the Women's Center, we are really able to enact a lot of these, even if it wasn't using the words of foundational radical empathy and archival practice. We were founded by a Black feminist who had a total understanding of the importance of the connection of memory work and archives with history, with justice work, with liberation, with telling stories. So we really were founded on feminist principles to begin. So that has really, I think, undergirded the practice, and to come into a space like that where that was the mission has been a rare treat, frankly, in academia as well. So I just want to give a quick highlight. We are actually the repository of the papers of Toni Cade Bambara and Audre Lorde, which I don't know how widely that is known, but we do have Toni Cade Bambara's collection, just a rich collection. I say both of them were memory workers in the work they did, Toni Cade Bambara and Audre Lorde, because they saved a lot of things. They saved everything, as their families might say, but they're both really rich and really open collections. So Toni Cade, for instance, has scripts or correspondence, drafts of her writings, drafts of The Black Woman, drafts of her film, correspondence with Octavia Butler, Pearl Clegg, just a number of other Black women writers as well. And so, of course, we have the papers of lesbian feminist, mother word poet, and librarian Audre Lorde. And her collection, again, is just very rich: correspondence, unpublished materials, lectures, writings. And people come really the world over to use these collections. So again, the repository for an HBCU founded with the intent to educate Black women, and the collections of Black women writers and feminists. Excuse me. So now I just want to go to a few examples and again leave room for some of the conversation and questions around radical empathy, Black feminist archival practice, and how we enact it here in some ways that I think hopefully can be models and points for conversation. So I want to take a moment to again really shout out our wonderful colleagues, Akia Collier and Dr. Tanya Sutherland, who co-edited two really powerful and beautiful volumes centered around Black archival practice, and those through the Black Scholar. And that particular issue, I mean, featuring some of our own colleagues on this call, from intellectual luminaries such as Alexis Pauline Gumbs, to really look at the past, present, and future again of Black lives in the archives, and looking at theory and archival practice and praxis. And what does that look like, again, in traditional spaces, but I think outside of the traditional norms of spaces. So it's a beautiful, powerful issue. And I was very fortunate, full disclosure, to be able to write a piece about the Spelman archives and the feminist archival practice. Again, kind of centered around these questions. How do the papers of Black women, feminist writers, and activists illustrate a collective wholeness? And how do these collections expand on concepts of care, celebration, and repair? And it was focused, this particular piece, on using radical empathy in archives as a feminist ethics of care, and specifically, what does it look like to undergird a Black feminist archival practice, i.e., using the practices and praxis of specifically Black feminists to enact this memory work as well. So this was just a little bit, it was looking as a case study really for using the Audre Lorde and Toni Cade Benbar papers, from everything from their use and research purposes on how we are able to use these to again, enact these principles and amplify not only their work, but around principles against white supremacy, misogyny, the intersectional oppressions, or the interlocking oppressions, as our colleagues in the Combahee River Collective statement said, to that Black women face in a number of other historically marginalized communities of the majority in this world, of the global majority, excuse me. So again, Bambara Lord and other Black archivists were really functioning as memory workers in their own way, in their intentionality, because they were creating works, again, not validated for validation by the literary world, but for themselves and the diverse communities they've inhabited, and providing complex representation of the communities. And they both, one of the questions that we usually get a lot is like, well, why did they donate their papers to Spelman? Neither one of them went to Spelman, but Audre Lorde came to speak at Spelman, first in the late 70s, and did not have a good experience as an out Black woman at a rather conservative institution in the 70s. So, but because of her friendship with Dr. Janetta B. Cole, the first Black woman president of Spelman, she came back in 88, and because of that relationship, she donated her papers upon her passing in 92. Toni Cade Bambara lived in Atlanta. She worked at the AUC. She taught when she couldn't teach a class on Black women writers at Spelman, which is very ironic. We can talk about that later. She taught the class at her home. So both of them donated their papers because of the relationships they had with other Black women, in the intentionality about situating themselves and their written, published work, their unpublished work, into the diverse communities they inhabited there. So really using their how their papers came, how we employ their papers, is really what I, see as a Black feminist archival practice. It's not just the feminist ethics of care and stewardship, but again, using the liberatory strategies against intersectional oppressions and interlocking oppressions of Black feminist writing to model community care. And again, the care we're talking about, the communities we mentioned, those who the records are about, those who use the records, those of us who steward the records, and the broader communities in this memory work. So to forge genuine cooperative relationships and not co-optive relationships, but most importantly, to undermine and eradicate any systemic oppression in this work. So again, this space was very unapologetic founded on Black feminist principles. And again, that relates back to our own collecting strategies from everything from our outreach and advocacy. And I mentioned this third point again because I know often, forgive me, I think I mentioned it later, but the idea that we're supposed to be neutral and detached from doing this work. Now, I know we've long, especially thinking of the work of the luminaries in this space, have long challenged that. But again, I'm able to bring myself and my authenticity as a Southern Black woman into this space. And I'm able to bring that, that's seen as a strength where I can bring my own experiences, but not essentialize the experiences of other people of color, other Black people, other Black women as well, but use that as I can show up as my authentic self and use that to support these restorative care and celebratory practices as well. So, just again, really undergirding why we do this work that we do and thinking of how does this, if we're speaking specifically about Black feminist archival practice, how does this relate to all of us who might not be Black or feminists? But I think, again, hearkening back to the Combahee River Collective statement, there was a collective of Black queer feminists who came up with this very oft quoted, very iconic statement of their practices and principles. So again, they outline the struggle. We are committed to struggling against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and class oppression, and see our particular task as the development of integrated analysis and practice based upon the fact the major systems of oppression are interlocking. So again, intersectional, as intersectionality is stated by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. If Black women were free, it would mean everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression. So, and I think this is very important because, again, we're looking at Black feminist archival practice as a liberatory structure for all people. And again, that freedom of Black women would necessitate the freedom of everyone. So I think it's, again, important to make that distinction and understand the liberatory nature of these Black women writers and feminists to undergird not only our practice, but then again can serve as a specific model for this particular work we do. So again, some of the restorative practices that we're able to focus on here, specifically in the Spelman Archives, and again, amplifying that work that a lot of you all do, is again, bringing ourselves, our whole selves to the work, in addition to a self-awareness of who and how we show up. I think of the quote from the iconic Audre Lorde, and this is more of a paraphrase: it's not our differences that divide us, but it's our inability to celebrate, recognize, and accept those differences. So the idea that we can have encounters with people that don't have to look or think exactly like we do, but as long as we are transparent about how we show up and things are rooted, again, as Dr. Johnson mentioned earlier, in true respect, even difficult conversations can be had with true respect, understanding, and again, an equity and justice mindset about wanting a liberatory outcome from these conversations. And again, kind of revisiting the actual theories and practices that can be harmful, oppressive, and non-inclusive. Again, thinking of the work our wonderful colleague Dorothy Berry has done around restorative cataloging and conversations about how we, describe things, whether in archival practice or, library classification systems. Are we using harmful, oppressive language? If we're working with a particular collection, how is it being described? How are we amplifying? What kind of work and labor are we putting into this? Are we making sure our archival collections are broadly accessible to people outside the institution? And I think this third one has become very important to me, frankly, having worked previously at other institutions, including PWIs, where it was not the mindset of building collaborative relationships. It was more of a paternalistic relationship. Oh, we just want to help you. Particularly being at a PWI situated in a longstanding Black community. It was very, I think, paternalistic and insulting to think just because the institution had all the money and the resources, they just wanted to kind of be more extractive of collections and thinking people should be grateful. But when you build genuine, collaborative, reciprocal conversations, that is more of, again, thinking again of the work of Toni Cable Barr, calling herself a cultural worker and thinking ourselves as cultural workers or memory workers to be truly collaborative and to again be self-aware and transparent of how you show up, but to really listen to people. And that really leads into facilitating conversations, discussions for welcoming spaces. That last comment is just something that I feel particularly strongly about. Again, the fallacy of neutrality in the work. And we're not passive keepers of dead records, but we are active collaborators and with records and memories and embodied archives, our physical space of memories and conversations and records that shift and change meaning over time to different people. So how can we actively, support that work and stand on, they say stand on business, stand on these principles of ethical, equitable preservation, where it might be having uncomfortable and difficult conversations. So, and I'm sorry, I won't read all that, but these are just some of the example of some of the restorative practices that we do at Spelman. Again, really being mindful of having our uh, collaborations with current and former student activists to particularly to actively document their experiences, and particularly thinking of the work that we've been able to do with our queer student organization to really Afrikiti, that started as the Lesbian and Bisexual Alliance, to really document that history where historically the stories of queer students haven't been amplified in a lot of the written um, publications from the college or other collections. So again, to really build and collaborate with our student organizations, particularly that are very active on campus. One of the things I really appreciate about being connected to the Women's Center is it is very a non-hierarchical model of interacting and building relationship with students and even having them work here with us in the archives. It doesn't diminish the role and contributions. It's kind of almost peer mentorship. And one thing I just really want to say publicly is the wonderful model that Dr. Sheftal sets as the founding director. Dr. Beverly is a big deal. She could be as arrogant as they come because she's brilliant, but she models that. She is open and accessible, and that has really set the tone for the archives and the Women's Center to be a really collaborative space. Students help plan programs, such as the Toni Cable Barr Conference coming up next year. So that's really important. And again, mentioning our collaborations with community organizations to amplify and tell history, such as the Historic Washington Park Conservancy. Um, just really want to give a shout out to my sister colleague Christy for the work that she's done. And Historic Washington Park is a community that is close to Spelman, historic Black community that has been in existence since the early 19th century. So we've done collective programming, talked about joint digital exhibitions, virtual exhibitions, done workshops in the community, and hosted people here, but also gone beyond our walls. So that's very important. I also want to give a shout out to the work my sister colleague Brianna Simone Jones and another beloved colleague Banna Gabon, who taught Black Queer Studies and Audre Lorde courses here. So we were able to work and connect with students, community members who took the classes to use these materials and to collaborate and have students come in to do this work. And again, as well as our collaborative partnerships with donors. The last two oral history projects were generous donations or collaborations with external collaborators, and we were able to make these the Passing It Forward project and Heirloom Gardens particularly available through a collaboration with AUC's digital services. And also want to shout out Ash Kambahi and Dartracia Rollins, two sister colleagues, the Georgia Dusk Oral History Project, where they interview Black and queer or broadly memory workers, or I'm sorry, broadly organization organizers and community cultural workers. So please check that out when you get the chance. And so I mentioned the Tony Cade Scholar Activist Conference. If anyone will be in Atlanta or be interested in presenting, it'll be next year, March 27th and 28th. And I think, again, this is one of the biggest examples of care, celebration, and restorative repair where it's centering the archives in the conversation, because we have Sister Tony's papers here, and we're really able to amplify her life and legacy and her cultural work in a different way. You see that picture there, the young lady speaking at the podium, that is actually Sister Tony's granddaughter, Zoe Bambar, who's a phenomenal activist, a doula, organizer, and I would say one of the best parts is Sister Tony's family is still very involved with Spelman, with the archives and the conference. And it's just a really rich, again, broad conversation about work centered, mind about Black women and Black people that community members come through. It's a celebration. We have food and knowledge that are both being served. But I think that's, again, a wonderful example of the true outreach and advocacy, and not just talking the talk, but to really enact the principles of radical empathy in the archives, to not only have that understanding and connection, but having conversations around everything from reproductive justice and health to how can we enact these policies in our communities, or political conversations being anchored in the archives that we have here at Spelman, and having the students and community to see those broader connections. So just to really kind of wrap up this part of the discussion and to move into some more of the conversation, just to drive home some of the points about radical empathy, true radical empathy in archival practice, particularly centered in using the principles of Black feminist archival practice. True collaborations are not based in co-optations. I know y'all feel like I've preached and said that so much, but I just feel really strongly about that, because I feel like that's a very colonial model of doing things. They can be replicated at, any type of institution, whether it's PWI, HBCU, community service organization, and we do not have to rely on traditional models of structure, of hierarchies. And I know this is where the challenge can be when you're not perhaps either in, management, or you're in institutions with administration that don't care about these things. So then I think we can talk about, the conversation can become, how can we build our community networks to be able to support and amplify and advocate for each other to get those tools and strategies. Again, I just really feel like the work that we do should be equity and justice based, driven. If we truly care about disseminating access to information, a true outreach and advocacy to diverse communities, it has to be centered in actual praxis and focused on that. And I say transparent and self-reflective practices, because again, to see how to take a look at how we show up in the work we do as people, as humans that are flawed and can be problematic and have, problematic ideologies, and to just really truly be self-aware and self-reflective, however people choose to do that. And I want to amplify again the intentionality. Slow archiving is a word I got from my sister colleague Shatra, and so often the work I feel like we do can be like fast paced. You got to get something done. You got to get this grant in. You got to get this partnership. But what about the intentionality? Again, if you're building conversations or building collaborations, it takes time to build any type of relationship. There has to be trust. There has to be true understanding. I keep going back to transparency, and it might be some difficult conversations. So how can we enact that and be intentional in our work? And lastly, I just say, again, enacting and embedding the interdisciplinary scholarship. So bringing from LIS education, but women's studies, Black studies, queer studies, ethnic study, a lot of different disciplines that can center these particular feminist frameworks. So for our conversation, I guess really and kind of discussion, here are some of the things we can consider, and I would love to hear people's thoughts and commentary on. So what are some of the benefits of our approaching work with a radical empathy lens? What are some of these limitations? And what are some of the actionable ways you can have or can, excuse that typo, you have can, woo, and some actionable ways that you have slash can employ radical empathy, particularly Black feminist archival practice in your work. Thank you, Nicole. Woo! So finally, I like to end from a word from the Lord, Audre Lorde, that is. So she had written this actually in her 1949 journal. And I just thought that was so powerful. And again, to connect such a brilliant icon, luminary early in her life, had to remind herself of this. And this can be reminded for us all. Take your time. Take your time. Everything will be all right. So I think that's just a powerful word, and I'm just so grateful. I thank you all so profoundly and dearly for this conversation. Again, a huge, incredible thank you to my beloved sister colleagues, Dr. Cook, Aisha Johnson, my colleagues presenting, the friends here in the conversation, and all of you for your wonderful questions and attention. So I will. Um, Dr. Cook, should I put those questions back up?
Yeah,
Okay.
please put the questions back up. We've got plenty of time. If folks would use the raise hand feature, and you can come off mic and we can have conversation with Holly.
And thank you. I am shocked because I'm a yapper, so I see we have plenty of time. And so I was trying to be cognizant of not going on, and I say yapper with the most loving affection. But I see we do have plenty of time.
So Holly, while people are thinking of their questions, um, can you talk a little bit more? This might be a little tiny bit out of scope, but it's a, personal interest, personal privilege here. What was the process like of getting the Lorde papers, getting the Toni Cade collection, and getting those kind of like up and running?
No, thank you. Nicole, that's a fantastic question. And we actually get asked that a lot. And I wish Dr. Gasheftal really could, if she could be here, she would. And again, I just want to publicly extend, oh, thank you so much, everybody, for all your beautiful comments and being so present here. But I just, again, really want to publicly say, Nicole, how much I just truly love and appreciate Dr. Guy Sheftall's advocacy and care for the archives. Because I think we know, and we can speak freely, how it can be working with people who don't do this work particularly and don't have maybe, they don't have the experience. Sometimes it's hard to have the understanding or frankly care or knowledge to why it might cost so much to digitize or to process, or why we can't do the work with just two people. We have a small but mighty staff of two here in the Spelman Archives. And shout out to my sister colleague Nikki Carr, because we hold it down. But I just have so appreciated in the time I've been here Dr. Guy Sheftall's advocacy and understanding and trust of me as a steward and just as a critical support. So the Audre Lorde papers actually came here. So Sister Audre, as many of y'all know, suffered for cancer for years before she passed away in 1992. And I mentioned before she had come in 1970, 77, I believe, and I believe invited by Professor Ruby Sales, who was here. And there was pushback to her coming on campus as a Black lesbian. Frankly, Spelman can be very conservative. So she did not have a good experience initially, but Audre Lorde had a friendship with Dr. Janetta B. Cole, iconic anthropologist, president of Spelman College. And when Dr. Cole became president in 87, she invited Audre Lorde back to Spelman to speak in 1988. From everything I understood, a much better, richer experience. And actually, Audre Lorde was able to meet with some queer students while she was here. And from what I've heard, a student particularly was in tears thanking her for being here so they can be comfortable um, coming to terms with their sexuality. So just a really powerful interaction. And Nicole, I really, I would need to sit down and talk more, I think, with Dr. Cole to get at some of those exact conversations. But I know Dr. Cole had approached Audre Lorde about placing her papers here at Spelman as a as a special collections component to build research by about Black women. I know, really, she and Beverly need to really do one together, but it really was building that friendship and relationship of trust. And I would wager to think possibly with Sister Audrey and Sister Tony, I know from some of the donors I work with, it's just really important for them to have their materials at an institution that centers research by and about Black women and Black people and focuses on that. And it's not for money, though I'm all about folks getting the coin they deserve if institutions can pay, especially Black women writers and feminists. But there's a real care that the materials can be accessible and available, particularly to the students at an HBCU. So, and we have this beautiful telegram that I would have included where Dr. Cole sent to Audre Lorde. How many young people know what a telegram is? No, but in all seriousness, a beautiful telegram that she sent to her thanking her for this gift. And so after Sister Audrey passed away, two of my colleagues and my mentor, Brenda Banks and Carrie Cott. I know Brenda Banks, who class of 74, iconic archivist, rest in power. Brenda traveled to St. Croix with Dr. Joseph, Audrey's in partner, to get the materials and work with our colleague Carrie Cotton Williams to process them. And it was just a beautiful outreach. And same for Sister Tony. Her papers didn't come here till after she passed, but that was a generous gift of her daughter, Karma Smith. Tony had had a long relationship with the Clark Atlanta and Spelman in the AUC. Even I mentioned she was not. She received pushback about teaching a course on Black women writers, which we hear that now. That sounds insane, but again, that sounds absurd. But it's just again, thinking of some of the, probably the conservative correct, they're not radical like we're talking about now. It was a conservative curriculum, but she taught, it really do be young people sometimes. We just want to come back to that. But Sister Tony taught the class at her house in Simpson Ave. So the students went. She had a friendship and relationship with Dr. Guy Sheftall and teaching at Clark and staying involved while she was in Atlanta and beyond. So after Sister Tony passed, there started the celebration. I'm forgetting, forgive my memory, how long the Tony Cade conference has been going on, but in her work in memory, and it might have been one of the earliest times to celebrate the legacy of a Black woman feminist. And I think really from that, we're so grateful that Karma, and shout out rest in power to Taronda Spencer, my predecessor, who was a longtime archivist at Spelman, talked with her, and I think Dr. Gasheftal, about the donation of Sister Tony's papers here, again, where they could be cared for by Black feminist stewards, and the relationship that she had. And Karma very generously donated, and again, she and her family, including Sister Zoe, who's amazing, stay involved. So that was a long answer to your question, Nicole. But that was, I think really it does root back to the long lasting relationships and the trust and the sisterhood that was formed, and a real desire to want to have these materials be in a place where they'll be cared for, physically cared for, as well as spiritually and emotionally, with an idea to access. And I should say Audre Lorde's papers are very accessible. There's nothing that's restricted, even her journals. So I think, and I mean, really the same thing with Tony. And I think they cared about making sure things were accessible broadly, just beyond, just maybe traditional scholars and uses in dissertations. And we've had folks come in and use them for films, for creative works, organizers work to, come in to kind of get templates, you know, political ideas, philosophies, and some people they're just curious. They want to see something old. As a student told me one time, they were like, Miss Holly, I want to see something old, you know, from the 70s. And I was like, ooh, but I guess if you're born in 2000, that is old. So, but they care and they see that. So I'm just, you know, really grateful for their donations and wanting things to be centered at HBCU that can be served by diverse communities.
Holly, that is just disrespectful about wanting to see something old, but I digress. I just want to lift up, I just want to lift up what you said about trust, relationships, and care, right? And I think that that is, you know, really part and parcel of everything that we're doing with this whole convening and this whole project, and certainly the work that you do. My brother Stephen Adams has a question for you next.
Hello, I know I'm the next speaker, so I won't take up too much space.
Hey,
But
Stephen.
hey, how you doing? I
Good.
can't remember if we had this conversation before, but definitely tell Dr. Sheftal I said hello. I don't know if we talked about my connection to to Dr. Sheftal, but she was responsible for or it kind of inspired or sparked the curiosity of a good friend of mine, Omar Freya, who started Black Men for the Eradication of Sexism, and I was a member and
Mm-hmm.
later president of that group, and we we were deeply inspired by the work of Dr. Sheftal and others at Spelman, and I'm thinking about I just think about the beauty of you creating space for people to be curious about Black feminism and its history, and the importance of there's a different kind of curiosity there than might be at Emory or at Morehouse about Black feminism, right? Who would care for the legacy?
Mm-hmm.
What curiosity would they bring to it? And so just thank you for being that caretaker. And I'm just sharing. This is a little preview of what I'll share earlier. I actually have uh, um, some Audre Lorde in my presentation related to this. So just wanted to give you a shout out and just share my excitement for your work.
Stephen, thank you so much. And I'm so excited about your presentation coming up. And we had a taste, what, 2 years ago at the wonderful conversations we had. But I think that's just so incredible to think about. How can we be radically curious and what does that mean and look like? And thank you so much for your words. Again, I'm so excited for our conversation because what you said does make me think about I had the immense pleasure to be in conversation with Dr. Susanna Morris, who just came out with a beautiful biography on Octavia Butler called Positive Obsession. Please run out and get it if you can't. But Stephen, when you said it made me think of somebody like Octavia Butler was radically curious. And it really just occurred to me, you know, as we're talking now, like just the beautiful way Dr. Moore, like her intellectual curiosity but not just for the sake of it, for really for her writing for the betterment of community, liberatory strategies is heeding warnings. She is almost like the epitome, the more I think about it, someone who is radically curious. So I'm really grateful for your work and excited to see these conversations and like you said, how we can think of ourselves, like what does it mean to be radically curious and enact that. So thank you so much. Yes, Dr. Johnson. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Cook. Yes, let me let you facilitate.
No,
I can't see too good.
no worries, no worries. I'm asking on the behalf of Dr. Crystal DeGregory. Thank you for being here. I wish for Archivist Smith to talk some on the joys and grief associated with memory work or laboring archives, compassion fatigue, and how institutions and even families sometimes wish to steer, if not censor, the types of stories told. I also wish to ask about self care. Far too many Black women activists deny themselves, as we know. And also, for example, our wonderful, wonderful FIS archivist and daughter of Jubilee, Miss Beth Madison House, my dear mentor, and Dr. DeGregory's.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Dr. DeGray, for that excellent question. And then I think, yeah, it's a lot of both the joy and the pain, the sunshine and rain. And honestly, to quote that wise philosopher Frankie Beverly, it's all those things. And I feel like that's where it's important that we have community, that we can take care of ourselves and each other, if that makes sense, really. Because I mean, full transparency, again, I say my mother passed 2 years. That's not anything that will ever go away. And I find myself still challenged by my own personal grief. So even sometimes looking, in Audre Lorde's collection, particularly, or other collections, and she might be talking about her own worries, her own grief, her own cancer journey. I have my own tears and it's my own grief. But I'm glad about that because that connects me as a human. Now, what do I do? Thankfully, I'm in a space, meaning the Women's Center, where I have the space to, whether I need to step out. I just again want to publicly thank Dr. Guy Sheftal because when my mom got ill and transitioned, I could be present with her. Like just the ability to take, a couple of weeks off to be present as she transitioned and to plan, that was, helped my own grief journey just as a human as well, but to be able to show up and be present and to do this work and to understand as a human things, as a sensitive person, things tend to impact me a little differently. Um, so I think, and then I also want to mention the fact that when our sister colleagues did our presentation at SAA and we're editing, we talked publicly about, and in that journal, how one colleague, sister colleague, was dealing with the death of someone she was close to, at the same time working on one of her collections that was particularly, had a lot of conversation around deaths, around human rights violations, so that we were able to really talk and be present. And that wasn't a foreign concept, the fact that you should somehow be divorced or devoid as a human from this work. I think really created the space where we could just hold space for each other. And it wasn't about trying to push through and do, well, let's hurry up and feel these feelings so we can do this work or get this article out. And again, I want to extend tremendous love to Andrew because it did take 5 years to do that issue. But again, global pandemic, the heightened state and sanction violence, you're trying to keep yourself alive, your families, and just the regular stuff. So that was a lot of, how we moved through the grief and the grief that can come when you're a caring person and working with collections that, you can see yourself in or other community or, just as an empathetic person. And the same in the joy, I think it really does go hand in hand. It's a harmony. I really, it's an honor to do this work. And as Dr. Cole said, this space is sacred ground, Spelman, really. So there is, I mean, we have a lot of joy. There's a lot of laughter. The stereotype of shushing librarians, often we're making the most noise, but we're able to share that with our researchers that come in and see that we share meals, we have laughter. It is all those things. And I think that I'm grateful it can exist in my space. And unfortunately, I know not everybody has that in their institution. So I think convenings like this and creating community like this is important to have that, to do this work and to sustain ourselves and to have, again, that's where some self-reflective practice that can help. I try to have a gratitude journal as well as a grief journal. And then to take actual breaks. And I think going back, like you said, to the self-care aspect, I will say this publicly too. I do therapy for grief, and that is a very helpful restorative practice. I have accountability partners that can snatch me up. I know Aisha has had to a few times, just uh, are you taking care, you and Nicole and I talk, our colleagues here, have you eaten today? Have you gotten outside? All right, let's go out for 10 minutes. So I think it's self-care, but it's communal care and it's collective care. And it is really about the check-in. No, how are you doing? And stepping in to be like, what do I need to do? Um, so yeah, did I answer all your questions, Dr. DeGray? Oh, and how some families wish to censor the stories told. Interestingly, I know that has happened. I've actually not dealt with that here, but I recognize we're in a different space. And I just have to say personally, what I like to do is also to recognize that people are human and they're complex and even problematic, even our faves, as they joke and say. But to try, one thing I don't want to do is to create like clean, sanitized versions of, history. Like we want to show holistically the whole person or institution in a way that it is open and honest. So thankfully that I've had not had to deal with that directly yet, but I think I know the colleagues who do that work really we really try to emphasize on not sensationalism and just titillization, but understanding the importance and need to document people, institutions, honestly, open and broadly, and try to reflect that. Thank you so much for that great question.
And I'm gonna lower my hand. Also, Holly, and a number of us do that compassion fatigue work in communities, and you definitely have to do it within the profession, but surely archives, because you are leaving the present and dealing with things of the past. I mean, the things that we read and see in archives can also be very heavy. So there has to be some radical empathy for self as well. So valid point. I wanted to, and yeah, I do have to snatch y'all up sometimes, because if everybody would just listen, but they don't listen to me because, I'm young, but it's okay. There's one more question for you, Holly, as we wrap up. Hi, Holly from PJ. Just curious, what percentage of Lord's collection is digitally accessible?
Excellent question, PJ. So none yet. None yet, but that is really something that I'm interested in pursuing because just of the sheer nature and interest collectively. I will say if I will drop our website into the collection, and for anyone, if there are components of the collection that you might be interested in seeing or scanning, that is something that we do for a small a small nominal fee depending on the number. But none yet. But I am very interested in the next few years is about how we can see that being a possibility. So thank you for that question.
All right, so I'm gonna step back in because we're almost at time. Holly, just to kind of piggyback on what you were saying in your last collection, excuse me, last response, I should say. The first time I did archival work, I had a doc student working with me, and they told me, Dr. Cook, I don't know if I can continue on this project. Because we were talking about graduate students in LIS who were essentially discriminated against racially and otherwise by the professors in the program that they were in. And I thought maybe she was just being dramatic. She was a little prone to that. But when I went behind her and started going through some of that documentation, I had to put it down. So, it took almost 4 years to get that article done. So, it's a lot, right? We want so much to tell these stories, but we have to, as Dr. Johnson said, have some radical empathy for ourselves, because in a lot of instances, we are telling our own stories that we are still dealing with, right? And that can be, so super difficult. So I want to thank you so much for your presentation and for being here with us today. So just to the audience, we are still at 70 strong. Like, you don't know how full my heart is right now. But we are going to take our break from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern. All right, so take some time, get some food, take a walk, just kind of process everything that we've been doing this morning. And we will be back here at 1 p.m. sharp to talk about curiosity. So I'm going to stop the recording, but I'm going to leave the Zoom room open, so you don't have to worry about, trying to find the link again. But thank you all so much, and we will see you back in just about an hour.